Good afternoon. You've made it into the Lair. My name is Akiba Howard, and today's discussion is going to be a little bit different. What I'm going to talk about today is where we go from here, how we engage this dialogue in a brand new way, because I think now is the time, post-March, post-initial marches, if you will, that we take some time out to reflect, both on what it is that we experienced yesterday, if you were out and a part of the whole deal, as well. It's important to pay attention to how we think and move forward. So, a couple things I'm going to do today. I'm going to start off by reading off a list of the cities that registered on one of the different sites, because I think it's important to pay tribute to the fact that there were active cities involved in what was going on. Now, I don't know if anybody that's going to be watching this happened to see the news that was on Saturday after the marches. If you were watching the national news or your local news, you probably saw one of these graphical maps. And the map depicted the different cities that had basically registered in some public fashion, either on the main website or some other Facebook website or something, that they were going to be holding a march. Now, there was something very interesting that we should all be paying attention to that I saw on that map. And that was that the majority of the cities that were taking action were on the East Coast and in the Southeast. Then as you stretched across the South, you saw a bunch of cities that were involved, and then up the Southwest and the West Coast up into the Pacific Northwest. There were only a few of those yellow dots they showed on the map inside of the heartland of this country. I've had a chance to spend time in the heartland. I've had a chance to work as a correspondent for a television program in the heartland. And wow, let me just say that the disconnect that is the cause of the problems that we're running into right now is directly related to what I saw on that map. It's the divide between races. Now, I got to start. I guess I'm starting in a different place, so let me be clear. On my Facebook page, there has been a great deal of conversation consistently about why I continue to bring up race. Why is it, Akiba, I am asked, do you continue to bring race, the idea of black versus white, into this? And really, that's not what I'm doing. If you're really reading what I'm saying, you should be gathering the idea that I recognize this is an all-race issue. This is an issue that every single person needs to address. There is not a race that is outside of the scope of what we have to deal with. African Americans, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, Middle Eastern, white, it does not matter. We've all got to get involved in this discussion. And what I saw on that map showed that we're not really all in that discussion yet. And this is why, again, in the Midwest, there's a majority white population. That majority white population did not feel at all like they needed, and I'm not saying all of them, please, let's get over all of this splitting hairs. When I say things like they, I don't mean all of them. I mean the ones that we are specifically all able to identify as the ones that are anti-civil rights, right? So when we get to this place where we're trying to figure out how to have the conversation, what you've got to understand, and you means everybody, is that this is all inclusive. Everything we've got to do is all inclusive. Everything we've got to accomplish is all inclusive, and that means every single shade of the rainbow. And we all have to reach out in a different way than we have been. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do on my Facebook page, is to have an honest conversation, because I know that there's a level of honesty that becomes uncomfortable for people. I accept that. It's uncomfortable for me at times as well. Don't get it twisted. I'm just another man. My blood runs red just like everyone else's. And the issue that we've all got to face is that on the inside, we are, in fact, all the same. on the outside we're not. And a great deal of what we go through on a daily basis, as whatever ethnicity you are, what we go through on a daily basis is very much tied to the color of our skin. Now, we can want all you wish for that to be gone. That's just not the reality right now. To get there, we have to put in work. And that's kind of what's been going on. That's kind of the theme of how this Trayvon Martin experience has been playing out. And that's what we have to remember, is that what this discussion, what this dialogue has to become about is the way that we all open up to one another and engage in honest discussion. Now, back to my Facebook, it's been an interesting set of circumstances, to say the least. I've had a number of friends that have left the flock, if you will. They've unfriended me. Likely in part because they felt I was going a little too hard on this race issue. Every one of those friends was non-black. Every one of the friends that unfriended me was non-black. And almost every one of them I had a direct discussion with that led us to understand that we stood on different sides of this issue. And again, there's still nothing wrong with that. I'm okay with disagreeing with somebody, but I wish that we could do it as grown-ups, so that when you hear me say other things like non-black, you understand that what I'm saying to you is that there is a distinct difference in our experiences. There's the black experience, and then there's the non-black experience. And let me be clear, many other races fall under that black experience. I mean, it's people of color versus people not of color. But for the purposes of what's been going on over the last couple of weeks, it's about black and white. And that's what I think we all, yeah, I get it. It makes you uncomfortable. But that's okay. Talk about it. Engage. Figure out what that thing is that is making you uncomfortable, and ask. Ask a question. You don't have any black friends? That's fine. You can still ask somebody who can ask somebody else and give you some kind of an honest, sincere answer. Let me explain, a little deeper about some of the conversations that have been going on my Facebook page, so you get why I've had to make these kinds of distinctions. I had one friend who publicly posted the day that Stevie Wonder announced he was boycotting Florida. This person posted to my page a link so that everybody who was coming to my page could go and read about Stevie Wonder and his greatness. I don't recall what his tagline was, but I remember that the premise was, "Yay for Stevie." Now, almost immediately following his post to my main public page, he then turned around and started sending me a bunch of links. And these links were going to stories that were anti-everything change. There was a link, and each of the links would have a comment with it like, well, what about this? Or what about this? What about that? And why doesn't this qualify? And would this be stand your ground? All of these challenging statements. Now, had this individual remained in a conversation with me and accepted the fact that I was explaining to him what you're saying sounds racist, there's another one of those catchphrases. Sounds racist. Sounds racist. I hate that I have to create a key so that we have this structure of how conversations should be able to flow. But when people say to you, what you just said sounds racist, they don't mean that you are a racist. They don't mean that you have a white sheet and a hood in your closet somewhere hidden that you never pull out until your other friends come around. That's not what we're saying. What we're trying to explain to you is the level of insensitivity to the situation that we are in on a daily basis, so that you get that the words that you're using and possibly the way that you're thinking propagates the feelings, ideas, and elements of racism. Again, that's not to say that you hate black people or brown people or red people. That is simply to say that the things that you're saying alienate you from the consciousness and the emotional reality of the people that you're discussing it with. So, do we have that definition clear? I have to put these definitions out there because this is the foundation of the conversation and the dialogue that we need to have. The words that we use, and there are words that we use that you guys are uncomfortable with. Talk to us. Tell me what it is that you don't like me saying, and let's discuss why I've said it and what it is that I'm actually thinking, so that you get an idea of an understanding that I'm not saying you are a Ku Klux Klan member. I'm saying what you just said is a little problematic in the discussion that we're having if we're working towards a place where you are understanding my plight and I am understanding your questions. Okay, so these conversations that I was having with this gentleman, where he was posting these personal links but wouldn't post them privately, was a product of the breakdown in communication. And he was really kind of trying to goad me, I could tell. There were other conversations that I've had where people have said things to me like, the past is the past. Now, I tried to explain to this individual that that's just not the reality. And let me be clear. She came back to very clearly explain that it wasn't that she believes that the past is simply the past and we should all let go. She is one of the many people in my friend group who just want this to stop, who just want all of this to go away and for us to be able to live in harmony. The interesting thing is that that's exactly what we all want. Well, that's exactly what most of us want. But we cannot get there until we have the discussion. It just doesn't work. It's not going to happen. There's no way that we can have the discussion and have these words and phrases that we have to avoid. Look, taking the time out to ask the question, why did you say that? Why do you feel that way? What is it about that statement that you have to keep on making? Like, for instance, why I've been asked, why does it always have to be about black and white, black and white? Because this moment, and quite frankly, the history in this country, indicate a black and a white issue. So, before we can begin the dialogue and before we can address actually what's next, we have to take a look at ourselves, be willing to be honest, and be willing to get our feelings hurt. Listen, I'm okay with the things that you want to ask me. They may sting a little bit, but guess what? I'm a big boy. I'm going to get over it. So go ahead. Please ask me the questions. And not just me. Don't bombard me with them. Ask your other friends too, because the key here, and the title of this hangout, what's next? What do we do next? We've marched. We have peacefully marched, and we're going to do it again. As you'll see in one of the articles I'm going to read here in a minute, we are going to continue to be out in the streets in a peaceful way with the idea that hopefully this will convince people that we are serious about wanting change. But amidst all of that, we still have to sit down at the table, quote unquote, thank goodness for the virtual table that we all have, and talk. We've got to communicate, and we're not doing it properly right now. And that's because we, as African Americans, can be very hypersensitive about things. When we feel like you're not really paying any super attention to what we're trying to explain to you, and we hear comments like, well, can't we just leave it alone? Can't we just move on? That isn't a comfortable statement for us. So we respond emotionally. And oftentimes what happens then is an emotional response is met with an emotional response. And that creates a sense of an inability to go any further. And they get stuck, and people get frustrated, and they start unfriending people. All right. I think that really explains a large part of what we have to do and how we have to move forward in this idea of how do we accomplish communication on a real level? How do we accomplish the task of actually getting to the place where we want to be? I just don't. I think we all have to be a lot more honest. So, as I said, one of the things I want to do today is pay tribute to the cities that took part. And there are going to be some cities that get left off. Just go ahead and make a comment. In your city, you were doing it too, right below the video. It's okay. But I'm going to go through this list because I think it's important to note that cities all across the country were taking part in doing things in order to make their voices heard. And it's all in alphabetical order, so I'll go through as quickly as I can. Anniston, Alabama, Birmingham, Madison, Mobile, Montgomery, Little Rock, Arkansas, Oakland, California. Palmdale, California, that's my hometown, so of course, Oakland, that is. Then they were in Riverside. We were all out here in Sacramento, San Francisco, Seaside, Denver, Fort Collins, Colorado. They had 2 marches. Hartford, Connecticut, New Haven, Washington, D.C., Fort Pierce, Florida, Gainesville, Jacksonville had 2. Miami, Orlando, Tallahassee, Tampa, Atlanta, Augusta, Macon, Georgia, Davenport, Iowa, Des Moines, Chicago, Illinois, and Peoria, they were in the streets. Waukegan, Illinois, Wichita, Kansas, Bowling Green, Kentucky. Hello. In Lexington, Kentucky, they were in the streets. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And in New Orleans, they were out. Shreveport, Annapolis, Detroit, Flint, Michigan, Saginaw, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Kansas City, St. Louis, Natchez, Mississippi. Boy, that's pretty close to my father's hometown, Waterproof. Billings, Montana, Charlotte, North Carolina, Fayetteville, North Carolina, Greensboro, New Bern, North Carolina, Wilkesboro. North Carolina was busy yesterday. They were out in the streets in Camden, New Jersey, in Jersey City, Newark, also in Las Vegas, Albany, New York, Brooklyn, Buffalo, and Nassau County, New York, Staten Island, Syracuse, Akron, Canton, Cincinnati, Greater Cleveland had a march, Toledo, Ohio. McAllister, Oklahoma, Portland, Oregon had 2 marches, Allentown, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, and I'm going to read about Harrisburg in just a minute. There's a reason why I'm going to do that. It's because, and it's not the only one, there's a couple of other reports about marches that I want to read about, because it's not just enough to say their name, but to note that in some of these small towns where African Americans are not a majority, things are happening. People are talking, and this is crucial. This is super important. Columbia, South Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, Houston, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, Wichita Falls, Texas, Salt Lake City, yes, in Salt Lake City, and Alexandria, Virginia, Harrisonburg, Virginia, and Lynchburg, Newport News, and Norfolk. And the list actually goes on beyond that. Here's what you got to get about this one. This is pretty simple. This is about us finding a way to engage more cities, right? It's not enough for us to just be in the cities that I just listed. We got to even do more than that. Let me read to you about what was going on in Fresno. Now, if you're not familiar with Fresno, California, Fresno's a small town, Central Valley town. It's not that small. It's big enough. But my point is this. It's in the Central Valley, and it's not a majority African American. In fact, if you know anything about the Central Valley of California, there's a lot of migrant work going on there. A lot of our brown brothers down there. But let me tell you, in Fresno, everyone was out. I'll read to you from the Fresno Bee. Protesters rallied in Fresno Saturday to show their disappointment in the not guilty verdict in the Trayvon Martin slaying trial that has prompted protests and debates across the nation. At Blackstone and Shaw Avenues, about 20 people stood at one of Fresno's busiest intersections holding protest signs and black balloons and chanting slogans such as "Stand Up for Trayvon." Some drivers honked their horns in support, while a few gave thumbs down. You see what I'm saying here? As the sun blazed, and it was hot here in California, let me tell you, yesterday was a hot day. The group marched along Shaw to the entrance of Fashion Fair Mall and held a second rally there. Fresno protests marched in spirit, if not size, of larger ones taking place nationwide in the wake of the verdict exonerating George Zimmerman in the shooting death of Martin, an African-American youth wearing a hoodie who had just turned 17. Business college student Lachey Roberts, who was 24 of Fresno, said she organized the march on Shaw Avenue after watching the trial and feeling hurt by the verdict. She said, "I really feel the trial wasn't fair." But the rally encouraged her. She said, "I thought my family would show up." And she said she hopes to attend a Trayvon Martin rally next month in Washington, D.C. So note this, that in these rallies, in these moments of peaceful protest, you'll get why I'm talking about this in a moment. In these moments of peaceful protest, there are still people that feel it's necessary to engage in driving by, with your thumb down out of the window, or even inside of the window. I doubt many of them actually stuck their hand out of the window. Look, if you know some of these people, and a lot of us do, it's our responsibility. I was talking last week about being your brother's keeper. It's our responsibility to step up and to engage them in conversation. And no, you don't want to be confrontational about it. I'll admit I've been confrontational on my Facebook page this last week. And I think, quite frankly, it was necessary. I mean, I want you to be clear. I do not dislike any of the friends, even the ones that have unfriended me. I don't dislike them. I look at them in a slightly different light now, but I don't dislike them any. I just was hoping that we could get into a real conversation. And I never started off cussing at them. I never started off berating them. Our conversations usually devolved because they would make a statement like, things are better now, Akiba, why don't you guys just get over it? And I would say to them, now that's an offensive statement that you just made. That sounds racist. And they would come back with, I'm not racist, you know me, you've known me for years, and da, 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 da. So we don't have to revisit that. You understand where I'm going with this. We've got to engage these people. We've got to engage them in a way that allows them to get more involved in a discussion where they feel comfortable to say some things that are offensive. Yeah, there's some things that will be said that are offensive on both sides. And this is what I'm asking. I'm asking for us, if you don't want to come into this forum and engage with me, because I think we need to do this on a regular basis, if you don't want to come into this forum and engage, then open your own forum. Even if it's just a little chat window or a phone call or whatever. Open your own dialogue so that we can begin to actually get this to the place where we can work on it. See, if we don't do that, we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble, right? Look, let me read this to you. This is an article about, wait, let me find it here. Yeah, here we go. This is an article that describes what someone believes to be the case of peaceful protests being urged towards violence from the outside. And the question would be, where would that be coming from? But we'll deal with that at another time. This is from the Urban Daily, written by Ty St. Louis. And forgive me for squinting, I don't have my glasses. She writes, by all accounts, the demonstration in Atlanta, which started and ended in the city's predominantly black West End neighborhood and counted as many as 1,500 mostly black participants, was peaceful, with organizers aiming to keep the message in focus and not have their goal of demanding justice for Trayvon Martin and his family mired by any negativity. And that seems to have been the message delivered by protest organizers across the country. But somehow the negativity still got through. There were a couple of extreme and well-documented violent incidents, such as in San Francisco, where the media reports acts of vandalism left more than 50,000, and of course they're talking about, buildings and other destruction, $50,000 worth of property damage to area businesses, and of course across the bay, my hometown in Oakland, protesters took to the streets and blocked traffic, set fire to an American flag. I think we all saw that on the news, and scared a bunch of folks. So in other communities, down in LA, the violence was a little more subdued, as I think we all saw on the news. Folks were throwing D batteries at peace officers and things of this nature. A similar incident was documented in Atlanta's West End by journalist and author Maurice Garland, raising a question as to who exactly was behind these disturbances. Garland reports seeing a group of young white men at the march wearing gloves, long-sleeve shirts, and T-shirts tied over their faces. I thought it was just for show at first, Garland shared via Instagram after the event, but on the second half of the march, they deviated from peaceful Trayvon chants to "fuck the police." Excuse my language. A couple of others joined in, while some started shouting more peaceful things louder. Toward the tail of the march, when we got back into the West End, those same guys started banging on street signs, throwing rocks at poles making noise, Garland continued. He says, when I saw one of them bang on a rent-a-car van and throw a sign pole in the street, I picked it up, put it back, and I ran up to him. Upon returning to the residential portion of the West End, Garland says two of the same men, white men that he had been keeping an eye on, threw a hammer through the windshield of a police car while the driving officer was inside of the vehicle. Though he was unharmed, the officer was understandably upset and immediately got out of the car, at which point the alleged perpetrators ran off. That cop could have just started busting on all of the black folks, Garland writes, the people who live there and are of the community. This rally was for Trayvon Martin, not anyone's personal agenda. These guys really tried to start a riot in our hood, and we would have been the ones dealing with the beefed up police presence, harassment, and negative media. The incident has gone undocumented by the media in Atlanta, which is fine by Garland and other participants in the march, who insist that the focus remain on peace and justice for Trayvon. But it does make you wonder how many more disruptions were really caused by people who were motivated by ulterior motives. Now, this is a report on the Urban Daily. I'm going to post this link inside of the chat room. If you're at the Google Hangout, you can go and read it. I'm not sure that I want to be very careful about this because I'm actually taking a turn. As of today, it should everybody who sees this and watches it and notes my page will notice that I am shifting direction from my personal page to some of my show pages and cause pages, and that's where I'm going to take this discussion to because I want to move it off of my personal page. I needed it to be on my personal page initially, and I'm not making any excuses, nor am I apologizing for anything that I've posted. What I'm saying to you is that my personal Facebook page is just that, my personal Facebook page. I will still continue to post certain views there, but at the end of the day, what I want to happen is I want these issues that we need to be talking about in this forum to be separate from the Akiba Howard or inspired actions element. So, in that shift, what I'm also going to be doing is changing some of my approach because it has been a little visceral and emotional lately, but it's also been something that I think was important in order to explain the premises that needed to be explained to some people that needed to hear it. Now what we've got to do is we've got to find a way to have the conversations that need to be had. We've got to find a way in order to address situations like the one I just described to you in Atlanta, where we see individuals who are doing something wrong. And again, understand, in the context of that article, they ran off, leaving the rest of the peaceful marchers to be the ones to get beat down by the police if the police had actually gotten mad about it. Yay here's a checkbox in the green happy side for the Atlanta police who didn't flip out. But this is also our responsibility. I'm not saying that folks should have surrounded them and started beating them down, but we've got to be the ones to actually make sure that those kinds of things are addressed. For me, it's not okay that that wasn't dealt with in the Atlanta media. I think that it should have been front and center because while we need to talk about peace and we need to talk and engage from a place of peace, these things have to be made clear so that individuals are able to take, that brother's keeper sense of responsibility. And just to help you guys understand how I come to this logic that somehow we need to engage in this brother's keeper premise, this is what we preach all around the world. This is what we said when 9/11 happened, and I've referenced this both on my Facebook and I think I talked about it last week. We asked the Muslim community to do something for us, Americans, non-Muslim Americans. We said to the Muslim American community, if you are not part of this extremist group, then please do whatever it takes to rein the extremist portion in if you guys see it. If you identify it in one of your mosques, please rein that young man in so that he does not try to kill all Americans he runs into. We asked them to do that. We said to them, could you please be your brother's keeper? In the same vein of that, white America has asked African Americans to rein in that extreme side of our populace. When the rioting began, some of the first things that were posted on my Facebook page were ideas of why you're tearing up our town and stop that, and that's so horrible. And I agree. I'm not in favor of hitting anyone in the face with a hammer, hitting anyone in the face with anything, hitting anyone, period. I am not for the violence. I don't agree with tearing up and burning down businesses or throwing hammers through the windshields of cars. Not at all. But please place it in context. Shortly here, I'm going to play a video for you. It's a bit of a long video. I posted it in the Lair last night. It's a gentleman by the name of Wise Intelligent. He was one of the rappers from Poor Righteous Teachers. He was delivering some commentary during a Final Call convention, a gathering. If you're familiar with the Final Call, it's the publication, The Nation of Islam. He was in a discussion where he talks about rioting, which happens to be very timely, and this is a very old video of his. Poor Righteous Teachers, you know, we ain't heard that name in a long time. But he's talking about rioting, and he talks about the music industry and a conspiracy. Well, not a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy well, actually, I guess it would be a conspiracy when a small group of people all work together to accomplish a specific task. So I'll play that video for you in a minute, but the reason I want to make sure that you guys tie it into what we're talking about today is because the idea that you can just get mad because people are rioting means you're not stopping to think about the element there. I get that where I say stop rioting too, but before I say stop rioting to some people that are not, excuse me, let me be clear. Before I demand that people stop rioting, and these people happen to be someone who I don't necessarily personally identify with, I'm going to ask them about their situation. And we're going to talk about why they're so angry and mad, right? No, not if it's my business that's being burned down. Obviously, I'm going to have a different, approach to the whole thing. But I'm talking about from the brother's keeper perspective. I'm going to be talking and engaging and trying to find out why you're so emotional about it. That's what we would ask of you, rather than the first comments out of your mouth be, cut that out, stop that. Nothing is that bad. Yeah, actually, while this may not be one of those moments, when we go back a few years, couple decades, there were some things that were that bad that caused the necessity for people to do more than just walk peacefully through the streets, because that led the people in charge, the people in power, to simply turn their dogs and water cannons on us. So I don't want to. We don't need to flesh out this rioting issue. I'm going to play the video for you. You make your own judgments. I agree. Rioting is bad. But the way that you discuss it, and again, that's really the issue here. Talk to me about it rather than telling me how bad I am or how bad they are for doing it. Let's have a dialogue about it so that we can actually figure out how. You need to understand why I might feel this way or why that collective might feel that way. But as we just learned in that article I read to you from Atlanta, it may not necessarily be who you think it is or who I think it is that's causing these problems. We do know, and there is some functional evidence to support the fact that the Occupy riots that happened in Oakland were actually seeded by someone else. Anybody that's listening that has those links, post them to the comments beneath this video, and I'll find some as well and I'll post them. But understand, we don't need to get into the long drawn out conspiracy theory talk. I'm simply saying there is evidence to that reality, and I think there may be some evidence to those realities existing still. And we need to be the ones that take responsibility to make sure we move the dialogue forward, as opposed to getting it stuck behind all of these weird quagmires. They don't serve us at all. So, let me say very briefly that the emotions that have been expressed on my Facebook page, I appreciate. There isn't any part of, I was sliding down in the chair, forgive me. I was about to be on the floor in just a minute. The emotions that have been expressed are valued, and they're very important to the dialogue, both mine and those that have been expressed by others. These are all crucial elements of how we move forward. But you have to accept some of our realities, and we have to be willing to accept many of yours. This is a cross-cultural dialogue, and to believe that there is no difference in us as people can be negated by simply looking at how we talk to one another, how we talk to ourselves first, and then how we talk to each other. I heard a very interesting story on NPR, and I meant to try to pull it up before we started. Yesterday, there was a whole discussion about it was Friday, on Marketplace with Kai Risdall. If you can find it, and I may look for it here in just a minute, you've got to listen to this story. It's almost worth me going to look for it, taking a moment out to play something else while I find it. The discussion was this. Is there a double standard for the way that African Americans and others, no, see, there I go, softening this issue. This is about black and white. Is there a double standard for the way African Americans and Caucasian Americans have to function in the professional workplace? And what they did was they went and they talked to a lot of different African Americans, affluent, middle class, low income. And what every one of them said consistently was, yes, there's a significant double standard. And that double standard exists in this way. I have to work extra hard in order not to be perceived as that angry black man, so as not to be perceived as the threat. And this is a consistent experience across the black paradigm. Understand, African Americans, when they go into the workplace, have to be more polite, have to be more amenable to weird and sometimes very awkward situations, because we have to pay the bills. We have to keep the electricity on, because we have to pay the car note or the bus fare, because we have to do the things that are life-sustaining. So, as it was said yesterday, for us it becomes a zero-sum game. Either we act in a certain way that does not make us seem threatening, which would then put us on the watch list at the workplace, or we just say what's on our mind, express what we're feeling in the way that we feel comfortable with it, and get fired and don't have a paycheck. This is a very, very interesting story that Kai Risdall did, or that one of his associates did within his show Marketplace. If you get a chance, go out to npr.org, pull up Marketplace, and look for the Friday episode. At the end of the day, how it ties back into this discussion is this idea that there has to be a level playing field understanding of how this world is actually existing. To assume that, as the president said, we are functioning from an experience. Our emotions are functioning from an experience. Part of that experience is very much this. Now, I'm going to go way out on a limb here, and I have to be honest with you. I'm a little uncomfortable about what I'm about to talk about, but it deals with this idea, this very topic. It's the idea that even I have had to do this thing that I'm describing. And it creates a double standard that I've had to live within for all of my time in the entertainment business. There is a standard perception among many Caucasian Americans that you have to be walking on eggshells around black folks because they may flip out on you. And there's always this sense of like telling a joke and then looking to see, what, did you think it was funny? I didn't offend you, did I? When you're called into a meeting, people, start shifting in their chairs and trying to make themselves, seem as if they're not the guy who you were just hanging out with, the day or the week before. so that they can assume this sense of professionalism, because this is what they've got to do in order to have this conversation. In that, what we clearly get, African Americans, is that we had better be overly polite. Now, understand what I'm saying there is that there are plenty of circumstances where I've had coworkers who can come in and say whatever to the boss, come in and the boss will make a request of them, like, could you please go out and get this footage for this? And they go, actually, I don't think that's a good idea. I'll go out and get some footage, but this is what I'm going to do. If I say that, I'm no longer on the show. I'm no longer in the program. It's a wrap. This translates not just in the entertainment business, I'll get back to that in a second, but it translates even in just a standard corporate office place. When I worked for Hewlett-Packard, it was very much the same thing. There were a number of, that's not true. There may have been 5 or 6 African Americans on the floor that I was working on, and maybe even less, I'm not sure. I know that there were at least 3. And we all looked at each other as we were walking by in the hallways. But this floor had maybe a total of 75 to 100, top 110 people working on it. And there were 3 of us, maybe 5. When something would happen on that floor, let's say someone's lunch came up missing, they could come out and start going around asking everybody, have you seen my lunch? Have you seen my lunch? It was in a brown bag, had my name on it. Have you seen my lunch? You don't know I saw you in the kitchen. Did you? This is the kind of thing that they felt they were perfectly entitled to do. I watched a woman, one of the other black women that was on that floor, do the exact same thing. Didn't work out well. Now, you may question whether or not that's a real story. You may question whether or not the idea of that actually happens in corporate America. It does, every day. Whether it's happening at a tech office where I'm, a temp, whether it's happening in the radio business, whether it's happening in, the television business that I'm working in, the premise is the same across the board. I have had to be turned. When I say turned on, what I mean is I've had to have that extra smile. I've had to have that when I'm having a bad day. You can't see that on my face because that means I might be angry, and then nobody wants to talk to me. And then it's all of that. Are you okay? Is everything all right? Is there anything we can do for you? Do you need to go home, Akiba? Is everything? Anyone else can have a bad day and come in looking all mad and mean, and folks still go up to them like, hey, we got that meeting at 2 p.m. You're going to be there, right? This is the issue that you've got to understand sets an emotional mind moment for us that says, we got to stop that. We have to find a way around that. We have to find a way as African Americans to communicate to you that that's not necessary. You don't have to walk on eggshells. Let's just talk, right? Let's just interact. But you also have to be willing to accept I am who I am, and if I'm having a bad day, you can't hold that against me and be afraid now just because I have a different look on my face. And that's oftentimes what happens. I come in with a different look on my face, and the whole thing, everyone's mood changes. When we're more honest about these kinds of discussions, we have the ability to accomplish more. When I worked in the entertainment industry for certain individuals, once they get to know me, the production crew is great. Everybody, we all get along just like we're all a band of brothers and sisters working together. But it's funny to go places with a crew and to have the people that I am about to interview look at me like, who's this guy that you brought along? Why is he here? Now, I have to say to you that I very much appreciate, and I don't know whether either one of them will be watching this, but a couple of the cameramen and producers that I worked with were very much in tune to this. And so they were, and we had this all set up, and it was timed out perfectly, where they would jump out of the car and go, introduce themselves to whoever the farmer was or whoever we were about to interview at a store or, at the lumber mill or whatever the case is. And they would say, hi, I'm such, and here's this, and this is what we're going to do. And then I would get out, as I'm getting out of the car, they say, and this is Akiba Howard, who will be interviewing you, or who is, he's the host of this program, or whatever the case is. And what that would do is allow them to be at ease. Oh, he's okay. He's not just some strange black guy that's walking up and that I should be concerned about. Believe me when I tell you, there have been times that I have gotten out of the car and people have given me the look of, do I need to go get my shotgun? And this is what I'm saying. I started off talking about that map that we all probably saw in the news that showed us what was going on in the Midwest in terms of the marches yesterday, or the Saturday, the Saturday, whatever the date was, the 22nd. That map was very sparse through the Midwest, and it's because in the Midwest they think a little differently. And we have to find a way to communicate with them. We have to find a way to get to them and explain to them, hey, it's okay. We're not here to do anything, to take anything from you. We're not here to hurt you. We just want to communicate and be able to live in this same experience with you. What I'm doing right now is I'm pulling up the video that I want to show you of Wise Intelligent, who's discussing something very important. So this is going to come on. It's going to go live for you. I want you to just watch and listen to this video for a little while so that you get an opportunity to see what it is that he has to say about rioting. And I think you'll find it very intriguing when you discover what was happening at the Rodney King moment, what happened at the shooting of that young man 50 times in New York, and then we can always use the same example with Oscar Grant. There's something going on here that we all need to pay attention to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this video, and we're going to take a look at it so that you can experience this moment.
A lot of what he's saying is actual fact. It's actual fact. Yet it also speaks to the environment in which we are embedded as young black males and females in this particular society. Hip-hop changing from positive to negative was not a consequence of history. It was not a circumstance of history. It was nothing that just happened on its own. It had nothing to do with the changing of the times. It had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with the fact that there are people in this particular society who wants to see us exactly where we are. And we cannot let that point elude us. These are the facts. How do we know? 1967, Kerner Commission report on urban disorder, when black people said, yo, we're tired of this system. You know what I mean? This system is oppressing us. So we rebelled against the system. We burned things. We said, yo, we had enough. He did his little report on what caused these riots. So what caused these riots? He said it was young children who started these riots, and what motivating them was a high self-esteem and an enhanced racial pride. He said the majority of the rioters were high school dropouts, but they had a higher political orientation than their peers who did not drop out. And they saw the system as their enemy, so they attacked it in the right circumstance. So fast forward to 1992. Same thing. #1 record on the radio, we had Fight the Power. Fight the Power is on the radio. Rodney King gets beat before the world. The black youth rebelled against the system. Again, they did it again. And why? What primed them? Positive hip-hop. Primed them. Fight the Power. X-Clan. Brand Nubian. You had these groups out here who were pushing, who were politically orienting black kids in the right direction, giving them the proper prompters that they needed so that they can respond properly to oppression. All right? In 1967, when the riots happened, he saw that the self-esteem and the racial pride was fueling this. So he said, how do I bring that down so that they will not riot? And what he did, he flooded the airways with black exploitation movies. Nigga Charlie and the Return of Nigga Charlie. These were movies. Hip-hop didn't start calling people niggas. We had Shad. We had Coffee. Black girl turned prostitute to do whatever. You know what I mean? But these black exploitation movies brought down the self-esteem and the racial pride so that the kids will not rebel against the system of oppression. 92, the racial pride was back in effect. We had black kids going to Dr. Ben Yuckin lectures. We were spending our money to go see Farrakhan speak as opposed to going to a strip club. This is where we were. The most coveted article of clothing was a historically black college or university sweater. We were motivating children towards positive attitudes and lifestyles. And when Rodney King got the beating, has responded properly. Fast forward to our day. Sean Bell is shot 50 times in the street in New York by police officers. #1 song on the radio, Like a Lollipop. Nobody do nothing. Nobody respond to nothing. Trust me. Trust me. Just like the brother, I believe it was JT, the bigger figure, who said that the label executives came to him and said, yo, brother, we need you talking about guns and whores. You know what I mean? That's right. That happens. I've been in those meetings with management and had to ask me, is what you're saying really what you believe, so that we'll know how to market you properly. You know what I mean? This happens. Young Buck on his album, he has a song on his album that talks about police terrorism. The label said absolutely not. Jimmy Iovine said absolutely not. You cannot put that record on the album because it might create an atmosphere that might put police officers' lives in danger. Right. So they took the record off, but they let him keep the other 14 songs on the album that talked about killing black youth. So this is what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with a circumstantial consequence of history. You know what I mean? The environment that we're embedded in puts us in a situation where we feel we have to maneuver and play the game and water our message down. You know what I mean? But no, what happened was they intentionally shifted the paradigm to get us exactly where we are right now. Right now, we're feeding the prison industrial complex right now. Our kids are going to prison because they're promoting these records. They're promoting these records daily that send us to jail. You know what I mean? It's cool to go to jail. You know what I mean? They glorify these things. It's not the black youth. We're in a position where we get, like the brother said, the choice. You know, he said, I chose the positive, so I didn't do it. But every youth is not going to take that route. I know. I come from the projects. Grew up in the projects all my life. You know what I mean? And we're not turning down $500,000 to say nigga. We're not going to do it because we won't turn down $200 to take a package of crack from one corner to the next. You know what I mean? We live in a state of poverty and want of all things. So it's hard for us to make that. Our judgment is clouded. And they knew that the judgment would be even more clouded if they took groups like X-Clan off the radio. This is just what it is. And until we start to deal with the environment that's shaping the behavior, we'll never get to the next level. We have to confront that. Wait.
See, this is the most important thing that I think could be said. I hope that you were paying attention to that. I hope you heard it. I hope it made some sense to you. I hope that you got the base premise that this is more than... He was obviously talking about the music industry. He went around a different corner, and if you want to get the scope of how I even came to that, you can go over to the Lair and check on the post that I put up there yesterday, last night, about the record industry and an interesting conspiracy, how it could potentially relate to privatized prisons. But what I really was intrigued by was how he was talking about rioting and the mindset. In the converse, looking at the rioting through the prism of Caucasian American eyes, I understand the absolute disdain, and I completely get the idea that you don't understand why the hell anybody would do that. Most of us don't either, in terms of the actual physical action of doing it. But we do get the emotion, and you have to ask us about that in order to understand why we might get that. And not assume that because I'm saying this, because I'm saying to you that many of us, while we won't go do it, we understand it. Don't take that as meaning that underneath the surface we are some of these angry rioting people. Because by the same token, you don't want us assuming that because you say things like, come on, the past is the past, can't we move on? That we think beneath the surface somehow you are a racist. This is what I mean. Look at how simple words that are born out of the way that we're thinking turn into very emotionally visceral thoughts. Those thoughts create crises if you're not careful. So, what's next? What do we do after this? What is the thing that we're going to do? And give me just a brief moment. I've got to make sure that the power doesn't turn off on this computer. What do we do next? What is the thing that we're going to do next that allows us to succeed and move forward? Well, there are a couple things in my mind that we all need to be doing. So I'm going to throw my suggestions out there, and I would love to hear others' suggestions. Now, as I said before, I'm going to be taking this discussion out of my personal page and moving it on to some other specific pages. But I'm really not relying on Facebook anymore. And I'll talk about that for a brief second. If you're listening to me on Facebook, and if you happen to, be Zuckerberg watching me for some strange reason right now, don't take offense to this, but Facebook is turning into a piece of crap. And I don't mean that from the perspective of social interaction between friends. I mean that from the perspective of actually being a resource for people to engage in the functional kinds of action steps that can create change. In the last couple of weeks, a few interesting things have happened on Facebook in the vein of this thing I'm talking about. I've had a couple of friends who have posted requests of their friends. Now, these are people that have 500, 700, 800 friends. And one of them posted a request for 10 things. And this came out of last week's show. 10 things that you're going to do to help youth in this community. At last count, I think we had gotten to 8, and that was a struggle to get there. Then the other day, a couple of days later, another friend of mine who, hello Diana if you're still listening, she posted to her page something very similar. The idea that we've all got to get together and we've got to join action and what can we do, and the whole idea of it was, she's a doer and she wants some action done and she wants to take some specific steps, and that's great. So she posted to her page, and a few people chime in, and there's a lot of folks that were chiming in saying, "Woo, man, that sounds like a great idea. Ooh, Diana, you go with your bad self. Great idea, girl. Woo, woo, raise the roof." But there weren't a whole lot of people that were posting any action steps. And beyond that, there was not a sense of, I'm down with it, so let's see what I can do or what I will engage in. And that's a lot of what's happening on Facebook. So that we need to all be very careful if we want to be involved in a dialogue like this about trying to use Facebook as a foundational platform. I think it's a great tool to assist in things, but like with this video, it's going directly to YouTube. It'll be up live on YouTube in the Lair for people to watch in archive. I'll be posting it on the Radio Slot and a whole bunch of other places. And the idea is this. I want to break away from the idea that because I have 800 friends and because I have access to millions on Facebook, that somehow it's going to be a transformative tool. It seems not to be functioning in that way. Oftentimes we're disappointed. Those of us that want to get things done find ourselves, fervent about this idea of wanting to take an action step and do something, and then we post it and we're just waiting for the flood of interest because we're all feeling the same way and we really want something done. But it turns out not a lot of people are really kind of feeling that. A lot of people just want to use Facebook as what it is, the social interaction, catch up with their high school friends, post pictures of the kids and the dogs swimming in the lake and all that kind of stuff. I respect that. So how do we get there then? That means that we have to be proactive. It means that when we hear about marches, we got to get out. It's not good enough to say, oh, well, I'm thinking about it. If you're a member of the community that is directly affected, or if you're a member of a community that is empathetic to it, you've got to do something. And again, it's not enough to just post here on Facebook or say to your friends, oh no, it's very much in my heart. I'm concerned about it. You have to take actions. And you have to take those actions within the scope of how you can do it. Maybe the actions that you choose to take would be volunteering in the community. Take some time out to mentor some youth, as was one of the suggestions that was posted on one of the pages I was just referring to a minute ago. You've got to do actual things rather than the thing that we seem to all be kind of falling into the trap of, and this is the evil that is Facebook. Again, Mark Zuckerberg, I apologize. But listen, the evil that is Facebook is this idea that we've kind of fallen into this trap of being able to virtually click something and move on. By just clicking, we seem to feel like we have assigned a sense of our personal responsibility to it, right? We think for some reason that because we've liked a cause or a page or something, that shows that I'm involved, but it doesn't. To just like a page is not being involved. It's the first step of being involved. The second step of being involved is actually engaging in some dialogues. I have a dear friend that said something to me very interesting the other day. She was very upset about some of this Trayvon Martin stuff. She's got mixed children, and her concern was that while she's feeling all of these emotions, she doesn't have a platform to be able to get it out. She doesn't have a platform to be able to talk about it. And then she went on to say something that I really had to catch her on, and I hope many of you listening and watching will also pay attention to. Please understand this. Your level of intellect is irrelevant to whether or not you are important to the conversation. You do not have to have an MBA. You don't have to have a PhD to get involved in the discussion. It is not required. You're not going to be judged because you may have a grammatical issue in the way that you speak. I don't care. And most people don't either. And for those people who would be hung up on that, they shouldn't be worried about getting involved anyway, because they're micromanaging their experience of life. If you have something you feel inside of you that needs to be said, black, white, yellow, or otherwise, you must come to the table and say it. Let us work through the details of trying to figure out what you're saying. We'll ask you questions. Again, as grown-ups, this is how we do things. I should be able to just come to you and say, hey, what did you mean by that? And you should be able to answer that without saying, well, what do you mean? What, are you stupid? Just answer the question, so that maybe I'll ask you another question in an attempt to try to get to an understanding, another predefinition. Because someone asks you a question that you answer and then they ask you another question, that does not mean that they are trying to be a butthead. It likely means they're trying to actually understand what you're saying. Don't get offended. Stop being so offended. That brings me to the real first step, and I think I may have put the cart before the horse. The first step that we all have to take in this message is to get the ego out of it. Somebody years ago said to me, ego stands for edging out God. Oh, I'm sorry, edging God out. Look at me, I can't even spell. Eog, no. Ego. Edging God out. That's one way to look at it. You could also consider that the ego is the one thing that precludes you from being able to not have emotion drive everything you do. When you can set your ego aside to be able to have a grown-up conversation, you will find that you learn a great deal more about the world around you. So set that as the first thing you have to do. Before you enter into any conversations, humble yourself enough to set the ego aside. Then remember all the predefinitions I've given you, right? When you hear someone say, hey, that sounds racist, don't think they just called you a racist. They just said what you said sounds racist. Talk about that, right? When you hear somebody get upset about you making a statement and they ask you a question, don't get offended because they're asking, just talk about it. So we've set the ego aside and we've begun dialogue and we've started talking, and we remember that it doesn't matter what your level of intellect is. What's important is that you have something to say. So you take the time out to do that. You say what needs to be said, right? And you engage both on Facebook and on YouTube without the fear of retribution. Remember, that is one of the gifts of this virtual world, right? If you sign into Facebook and you post a reply to a video, it's not like that person's going to come knocking on your door. It's not like somebody's going to come knocking on your door saying, who the hell? You may get flamed, but listen, you can unfollow the post and never have to see it again. But if you don't engage, if you just sit back and watch it as a passive viewer, you are not helping to move the dialogue along. You may be the one person that causes that crazy to see things a different way. I know in all likelihood that's not the case, but let's be hopeful about this, right? When people say, let's go out in the streets and demonstrate peacefully, that's a hopeful action. That is hoping that I can go out into the streets and peacefully, I don't know why I'm having problems with that word. I do get paid to talk occasionally. Going out in the streets and marching peacefully is asking the society around us to please take note of the crisis we see and help us to make change, right? The same thing applies in this scope. Peacefully asking and communicating is how we get there. So now we have some action steps as to what to do next. But be clear that you should not make Facebook the only place you do it, because as I was saying, the evil that is Facebook is the idea that when you click the like button, you have now ascribed your support to that, which, yes, in part is true, but also in part is just a virtual fake out. Because by just clicking like and walking away and moving on to something else without taking any other actions, you have not accomplished anything. You have not helped this process in any way. Don't get offended by that. What I'm saying is that we have to do more. We all have to do more. We have to be responsible for making sure that we pull out our video phone, our video phone, and record those guys that Garland was referencing in that Atlanta article about the white guys in the masks that were banging on things and throwing hammers. Document that and then send it to the media so that it becomes a story. And if the media won't pick it up, get online and post it. That's where Facebook can become valuable. Twitter can become valuable. Use social media for that kind of stuff, and then have your separate thing that is your personal deal. But we have to document that kind of stuff. And then we also have to, if you're an African American and you're out in the crowd at a peaceful march and you see somebody doing something crazy, rally some troops to get them to calm down. Or go and tap a police officer on the shoulder and explain that you see something going on over there. Be the one that helps to get the thing done right. If you're a Caucasian American and you hear people having discussions that you know in your heart make you uncomfortable and you're awkward around, don't be confrontational, but engage them in a discussion about it. Maybe you can help one or two or more to see things a different way so that the words that come out of their mouths do not offend so many. Because again, oftentimes it's not that they are actually a racist, but that they're simply insensitive to the plight. Take these action steps and understand that from my perspective, this is what I believe is next. Because we've now marched in the streets in a bunch of cities around the country. Looked like there were a good 100, 120 dots on that map I was referencing earlier. That's a beautiful thing that we had all of that action yesterday. And on the 24th, there's more. But in between all of that and beyond that, we've got to be the ones taking the grassroots actions that ultimately turn into the big functional change. And that comes by us setting the ego aside, engaging in honest discussion, and being willing to, with that ego aside, from that place of humility, asking questions and answering questions that are going to be hard at first. This isn't an easy road that we have ahead of us, but it's a road we've got to travel down because the alternative is very scary. It really is. I think that, at the end of the day, I'm going to shut the broadcast down here very shortly because I want to make sure that not only this isn't a 3-hour video, but also that it's something that you can watch in a chunk that you're able to get something from. Please know that no matter what your color is, you have a responsibility in this. Whether it's to engage those people at your next backyard barbecue that you hear making comments that are horribly inappropriate, or whether it's that you're out at one of these peaceful marches and you see some brothers and sisters that are doing something they shouldn't be doing, and you go and you talk to them and calm them down and stop that. Don't throw yourself in front of a bullet or a hammer, please. Be safe, but do something. If you're out with your camera phone and you see something that should not be going on, capture it. Get it into the social media. It's what they're doing in the Middle East. Listen, when they shut down the news agencies in the Middle East, the way that we get the stories is through Twitter, is through, the small media outlets, these micro media outlets that allow these people to get their message out. That's why we're always hearing unconfirmed reports from blah, blah, blah. You be the one that's doing that as well, because if in fact there is some kind of weird conspiracy to incite violence in these riots by blacks or whites or anybody for that matter, shouldn't that be documented? Shouldn't we be working to root that out so it doesn't happen anymore? So you see, these are action steps. These are the next things that we have to do in order to make sure that this dialogue continues to move forward. Otherwise, we're just in really bad shape, and I don't see that we have much of a functional future as we move forward. I think we have to be very careful of how we do this and what, excuse me, and what we do in order to get there. So, as we go out, the last thing I want to do is I'm going to play the president's speech, because I don't know if everybody got a chance to see all of it, but I want to include that in this broadcast. This is what the president had to say about Trayvon Martin, his experience, and everything that was going on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me inside of the Lair. I'm Akiba Howard. Catch us next time.
Well, I want to come out here, first of all, to tell you that Jay is prepared for all your questions and is very much looking forward to the session. Second thing is, I want to let you know that over the next couple of weeks, there are going to obviously be a whole range of issues, immigration, economics, et cetera. We'll try to arrange a fuller press conference to address your questions. The reason I actually wanted to come out today is not to take questions, but to speak to an issue that obviously has gotten a lot of attention over the course of the last week, the issue of the Trayvon Martin ruling. I gave a preliminary statement right after the ruling on Sunday, but watching the debate over the course of the last week, I thought it might be useful for me to expand on my thoughts a little bit. First of all, I want to make sure that, once again, I send my thoughts and prayers, as well as Michelle's, to the family of Trayvon Martin, and to remark on the incredible grace and dignity with which they've dealt with the entire situation. I can only imagine what they're going through, and it's remarkable how they've handled it. The second thing I want to say is to reiterate what I said on Sunday, which is there are going to be a lot of arguments about the legal issues in the case. I'll let all the legal analysts and talking heads address those issues. The judge conducted the trial in a professional manner. The prosecution and the defense made their arguments. The juries were properly instructed that in a case such as this, reasonable doubt was relevant, and they rendered a verdict. And once the jury's spoken, that's how our system works. But I did want to just talk a little bit about context. and how people have responded to it and how people are feeling. You know, when Trayvon Martin was first shot, I said that this could have been my son. Another way of saying that is Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. And when you think about why, in the African American community at least, there's a lot of pain around what happened to him, I think it's important to recognize that the African American community is looking at this issue through a set of experiences and a history that doesn't go away. There are very few African American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me. There are very, very few African American men who haven't had the experience of walking across the street and hearing the locks click on the doors of cars. That happens to me, at least before I was a senator. There are very few African Americans who haven't had the experience of getting on an elevator and a woman clutching her purse nervously and holding her breath until she had a chance to get up. That happens often. And I don't want to exaggerate this, but those sets of experiences inform how the African American community interprets what happened one night in Florida. And it's inescapable for people to bring those experiences to bear. The African American community is also knowledgeable that there is a history of racial disparities in the application of our criminal laws. Everything from the death penalty to enforcement of our drug laws. And that ends up having an impact in terms of how people interpret this. Now, this isn't to say that the African American community is naive about the fact that African American young men are disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system, that they're disproportionately both victims and perpetrators of violence. It's not to make excuses for that fact, although black folks do interpret the reasons for that in a historical context. They understand that some of the violence that takes place in poor black neighborhoods around the country is born out of a very violent past in this country. And that the poverty and dysfunction that we see in those communities can be traced to a very difficult history. And so the fact that sometimes that's unacknowledged adds to frustration. And the fact that a lot of African American boys are painted with a broad brush, and the excuse is given, well, there are these statistics out there that show that African American boys are more violent. Using that as an excuse to then see sons treated differently causes pain. I think the African American community is also not naive in understanding that statistically, somebody like Trayvon Martin was probably statistically more likely to be shot by a peer than he was by somebody else. So folks understand the challenges that exist for African American boys. But they get frustrated, I think, if they feel that there's no context for it. And that context is being denied. And that all contributes, I think, to a sense that if a white male teen was involved in the same kind of scenario that from top to bottom, both the outcome and the aftermath might have been different. Now, the question for me, at least, and I think for a lot of folks is, where do we take this? How do we learn some lessons from this and move in a positive direction? I think it's understandable that there have been demonstrations and vigils and protests, and some of that stuff is just going to have to work its way through as long as it remains nonviolent. If I see any violence, then I will remind folks that that dishonors what happened to Trayvon Martin and his family. But beyond protests or vigils, the question is, are there some concrete things that we might be able to do? I know that Eric Holder is reviewing what happened down there, but I think it's important for people to have some clear expectations here. Traditionally, these are issues of state and local government, criminal code, and law enforcement is traditionally done at the state and local levels, not at the federal levels. That doesn't mean, though, that as a nation, we can't do some things that I think would be productive. So let me just give a couple of specifics that I'm still bouncing around with my staff. So we're not rolling out some 5-point plan, but some areas where I think all of us could potentially focus. Number one, precisely because law enforcement is often determined at the state and local level, I think it would be productive for the Justice Department, governors, mayors, to work with law enforcement about training at the state and local levels in order to reduce the kind of mistrust in the system that sometimes currently exists. You know, when I was in Illinois, I passed racial profiling legislation, and it actually did just two simple things. One, it collected data on traffic stops and the race of the person who was stopped. But the other thing was it resourced us training police departments across the state on how to think about potential racial bias and ways to further professionalize what they were doing. And initially, the police departments across the state were resistant, but actually they came to recognize that if it was done in a fair, straightforward way, that it would allow them to do their jobs better, and communities would have more confidence in them, and in turn be more helpful in applying the law. And obviously law enforcement's got a very tough job. So that's one area where I think there are a lot of resources and best practices that could be brought to bear if state and local governments are receptive. And I think a lot of them would be. And let's figure out, are there ways for us to push out that kind of training. Along the same lines, I think it'd be useful for us to examine some state and local laws to see if they are designed in such a way that they may encourage the kinds of altercations and confrontations and tragedies that we saw in the Florida case, rather than diffuse potential altercations. I know that there's been commentary about the fact that the stand your ground laws in Florida were not used as a defense in the case. On the other hand, if we're sending a message as a society in our communities that someone who is armed potentially has the right to use those firearms, even if there's a way for them to exit from a situation, is that really going to be contributing to the kind of peace and security and order that we'd like to see? And for those who resist that idea that we should think about something like these stand your ground laws, I just ask people to consider, if Trayvon Martin was of age and armed, could he have stood his ground on that sidewalk? And do we actually think that he would have been justified in shooting Mr. Zimmerman who had followed him in a car because he felt threatened? And if the answer to that question is at least ambiguous, then it seems to me that we might want to examine those kinds of laws. Number 3, and this is a long-term project. We need to spend some time in thinking about how do we bolster and reinforce our African American boys. This is something that Michelle and I talk a lot about. There are a lot of kids out there who need help, who are getting a lot of negative reinforcement. And the more that we can do to give them a sense that their country cares about them and values them and is willing to invest in them. I'm not naive about the prospects of some brand new federal program. I'm not sure that that's what we're talking about here, but I do recognize that as president I've got some convening power, and that there are a lot of good programs that are being done across the country on this front. And for us to be able to gather together business leaders and local elected officials and clergy and celebrities and athletes and figure out how are we doing a better job helping young African American men feel that they're a full part of this society and that they've got pathways and avenues to succeed. I think that would be a pretty good outcome from what was obviously a tragic situation. We're going to spend some time working on that and thinking about that. And then finally, I think it's going to be important for all of us to do some soul searching. There have been talk about should we convene a conversation on race. I haven't seen that be particularly productive when politicians try to organize conversations. They end up being stilted, politicized, and folks are locked into the positions they already have. On the other hand, in families and churches, workplaces, there's a possibility that people are a little bit more honest. And at least you ask yourself your own questions about, am I wringing as much bias out of myself as I can? Am I judging people as much as I can based on not the color of their skin, but the content of their character? That would, I think, be an appropriate exercise in the wake of this tragedy. And let me just leave you with a final thought, that as difficult and challenging as this whole episode has been for a lot of people, I don't want us to lose sight that things are getting better. Each successive generation seems to be making progress in changing attitudes when it comes to race. Doesn't mean we're in a post-racial society. It doesn't mean that racism is eliminated. But you know, when I talk to Malia and Sasha, and I listen to their friends and I see them interact, they're better than we are. They're better than we were on these issues. And that's true in every community that I've visited all across the country. And so we have to be vigilant, and we have to work on these issues. And those of us in authority should be doing everything we can to encourage the better angels of our nature, as opposed to using these episodes to heighten divisions. But we should also have confidence that kids these days, I think, have more sense than we did back then, and certainly more than our parents did or our grandparents did, and that along this long, difficult journey, we're becoming a more perfect team. Not a perfect team, but a more perfect team. All right. Thank you, guys.